All right. If you notice the announcement I made in Canvas, next 2 weeks, week 6, which is this week, and week 7, which is next week. One of the big things I want to achieve is give everyone an opportunity to catch up a little bit. So I'm sort of reserving these next 2 weeks for, number one, catching up on assignments that you have that are outstanding. And what that will involve is I invite you all to bring questions to class. All right, so please bring whatever questions or difficulties you're having for class. This is a very small class, but still there's a chance if you're having trouble with something that someone else is having trouble with the same thing. So therefore, your questions are likely to be very helpful to other people in the class as well. So please bring those questions to class. You can ask them either today or you can ask next week during the lecture time. If there are no questions, what I will do is I will cover a topic that is related to client-server scripting, maybe not directly, but sort of indirectly. And that is the topic of Bootstrap. And it's a pretty straightforward topic, just takes a little bit getting used to, but it goes a long way in allowing you to easily create nice looking websites. So let me ask now, is there anyone out there that has any questions about material in this course? Let me repeat for those of you that just entered the classroom what I went over a second ago. And that is, over the next 2 weeks, my goal is to do what I can to help everyone get caught up in this course as far as their outstanding assignments. I also, with any additional time that we have that's not spent addressing people's questions, I will cover the topic of Bootstrap. But sort of the first priority for me is to answer any questions that you may have concerning the material of this course. So let me ask again, does anyone have any questions over the material in the course? You can bring them up in class if you wish. I'll be more than happy to help you troubleshoot something that's going on in one of your labs. And troubleshooting it can be effective in that it can help other students that having similar problems. Often is the case that when one student has a problem, other students have that problem as well. You can also spend any of the lab times with me asking me questions for assistance. So let me ask now, those of you that are online, are there any questions that you have in this class? Okay, about lab 3. Can you be more specific? Okay, issues getting the pictures in now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to go over that part of the assignment. And if you notice in the assignment, it is stated that create the event handlers and the HTML elements as was done in the week 3 and 4 example. All right, so let's go and let's pull up that example. We'll take a minute to look at it, and then we'll talk about what's different, and then we'll pull up a little example of something similar to it, but maybe not exactly like it. So let me talk about what I mean by creating the events and creating the HTML elements like we did in this example. This example, if you recall, was changing the color of certain paragraph. And as we did it, we were writing to a li tag. Okay. So let's look at the code here, and let me explain what I mean by doing it the same way that we did before. All right, so let's look at the code. First of all, here is how we associated the page events, the events on the page, with our JavaScript function. We had a window listener to add a listener for when the page is loaded. So what does this statement do? This says, okay, when the page is open, after it's finished loading, execute this function. What does this function do? It grabs the button, grabs a pointer to the button, adds a listener for change color, grabs the clear button, adds a listener to clear the history. So what we do not want to do is we do not want to have an on-click event here. We did that in the first few examples because that's the simplest way to do it. But the better way to do it is the way that we present it here, to use JavaScript itself to create the events. And this is how we do it. All right. Now, what's different between this and what you need to do for the coin assignment as far as creating HTML elements? Well, in this example, the HTML element that I'm creating is an li tag. All right. So that occurs in the change color, where we change the color and we create an li tag. So these are the statements that are relevant to creating the HTML elements on the page. First thing we do is we use the create element method to create an li tag. We create a text node rather, that contains something. We add to the li, that text node, we grab a pointer to the history list, and then we add to the history list that li. And that history list is this ID down here. So what's going to be different in our example? All right. In our example, what we're going to do for this, and I'm going to write just a small example, a code that doesn't do everything, but does most of the relevant things. Are we going to create an element? Yes, we will. In the coin example, we're going to be creating an element. In fact, we're going to be creating several elements. if we've chosen 3 coins, we're going to create 3 elements. If we've chosen 8 coins, we're going to create 8 elements, and so on. But we are going to create an element. The difference is the element that we're going to create is an IMG. Okay, so we're not going to create an LI, we're going to create an IMG. Are we going to create text? Is there a text node that's part of an image tag? No, there isn't. An image tag simply says an image with the source and the alt attribute. All right. We need to set those attributes for the image tag. But we don't do that in this example. We don't set any attributes of the LI. We create a text node for it, but we do not set any attributes. So that's something brand new that we're going to have to figure out how to do. All right. We're going to then append that element that we create to some area on our screen. So let me copy this code. I'm going to create a new I'll just rename it. Better yet, I'll do this. Rename this as images. And I'm going to edit that. All right. So I'm going to get rid of these functions. I don't need them. I'm going to have a drop down. Actually, I'm not going to make a drop down. I'm just going to use an image or a text field. I'll create this page, then we'll talk about what the difference is between the page I created and what you need to create are. So I have a text box for the number. I'm not going to worry about validation in this example unless we have a question about validation. All right. I have a button that's called Create, and it is going to create images. And it's going to create as many images as is found in the text box. Need this paragraph. Don't need this UL. I'm going to make a div with an ID of gallery, we'll call it, because that's where we're going to put the images. Now I need an image, so I'm going to go out there, Google, and I'm going to search for the image of a penny. I'm actually going to search for Creative Commons license penny. Image as, just going to call it penny. We should put a citation for this, whatever page we got it from. Okay, so now I have an image in here called penny. Put it all on the desktop. All right, I'm going to do this a bit at a time. All right, let's make sure that the page looks correct. Number of images, create images. Cool. So, first thing I'm going to do is when the button is clicked, the create button is clicked. I'm going to call the method create images. Now, I'm doing a lot of renaming here, so I hope this works. I hope I got everything correct. But I'm going to test it out. I'm not going to rely on chance. So I'm going to create my function called create images. And I'm just going to log something to the console. It's going to say that I'm in that function. So I save that. Go and review the console. And I'm in create images. So I made sure that my button is correctly hooked up to this function. Now you might think that's really simple to do. Once you understand the idea of how you create an event, you know, how could that go wrong? Believe me, it can go wrong. All right, that's why we test it out. We're not going to try to write all the code all at once. We're going to write a little bit of code, all right, and then we're going to test it out. And we're going to test out small chunks of it. We're not going to write the whole thing. In this case, all I did is made sure that button works. All I did is made sure that that function gets called when I click the button. So try to create one image. That's our first step, is when we click the button, we're going to create the penny image. So we know it's with the JavaScript create element. Do we remember the syntax? Well, I don't. So we'll go here and look up the syntax for it. Put that code in here. And I'm going to say new image equals document create element image. So I've created an image object. That object is now floating in space, if you will. All right. It's not put anywhere on the page. We have to first set the object's attributes. So we've not done that yet. So we're going to Google create element set attributes. And this shows an example. Create an element. They created a div. We create an image. Set attribute. They created an ID, a title, and a disabled property. They also created a background color, a width, and a height. So we don't need to do all that. We just need to set two properties, two attributes for our image, the src and the alt attribute. So I'm going to say new image set attribute. I'm setting the source attribute. What do I want it to be? I want it to be the name of the coin image. In this case, I'm only doing pennies, so I'm going to do penny.jpg. I also want to set the alt attribute. All right, at this point, I have a well-formed image tag that contains a source and an alt attribute. What I have to do now is I have to add it to my gallery div down here. And we saw how to do that with the LIs. We simply append child. So I can say document get element by ID gallery append child new image. So compare this to what we did in the previous example. And you'll see that there's not a lot that's different. In the previous example, we used create element to create an LI. Here we're using a create element to create an IMG. Here we created a text node and appended that node. We don't need to do that here, but we do need to append the child somewhere. And here we append the child. The main difference is we're setting the attributes of that image tag because we have to in order for this to work. So let's save this. And let's see if it works. Some of these windows here. All right. That, we're not doing anything with that yet, so I don't need to enter a value. I click create image, and boom, there's a giant penny. I didn't count on it being that big. My console log tells me that I'm in create images. What if we want to make that smaller? Well, we can set the height attribute a couple of different ways. We can set the attribute of the style. We could make the height equal 100, let's say. And we get an error. Style set attribute is not a function. Thought we saw that it was. Oh, my mistake. We don't use the set attribute for that. And there we go. We got a small image. Again, we got 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. Now, we don't want to have to click it 5 times. We want it to automatically create 5 times if we type in a 5 in there. So how do we do that? Well, there's a loop instruction. There's several different loop instructions in JavaScript. And one of them is the for loop. So what we want this is we want this done a certain number of times. So we're going to include that in a loop. And I'm going to put the loop instruction up here, and then I'm going to explain it. This is similar to for loops in other languages. Now, I hard-coded a 5 in there to create 5 images. Remember, the whole idea of this is we're going to do this a little piece at a time. I know that 5 isn't the correct number to have in there. I don't want to do it 5 times. I want to do it however many times the user is entered into the text box. But sort of a step in getting to that is being able to do it some number of times. So I'm just going to arbitrarily pick 5 times. And unspecified token, images line 15. Click that. I don't get any. That's not good. Oh, should be a semicolon. There's 5 of them. Now, how does this work? For I equals 0, that's the initial value of the variable I. So the first time this loop runs, I will have a value of 0. We're going to do this as long as this condition is true. I is less than 5. And each time through the loop, we're going to increment I by 1. So the first time this loop executes, I is going to have a value of 0. Second time, I is going to have a value of 1, 2, 3, 4. So 0 to 4 is 5 iterations. So that will make for 5 iterations of this loop. I can log I if I want to see it, if that makes it clearer. Zero, 1, 2, 3, 4. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. Now the only difference, what do we have to change here? We have to change that 5. That 5 isn't going to be some hard-coded number. It's going to come from value of this text box. So I'm going to say number equals document get element by ID. What's the ID of it? TXT number. This is the whole text box. We don't want the whole text box. We just want the value from it. So I'm going to say value. And then our loop doesn't go from 1 to 5. It goes from 1 to whatever the number is. If we typed in 11, I goes from 0 to 10, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and there's 11 of them. Now here's the problem. If I run this again, I get 22. All right. Why is that? Well, because we're appending the children each time through the loop, but the previous children are still there. So what do we want to do? When this function starts, we want to clear out all the children from that gallery. How do we do that? Well, we saw that here. We'll change this to say gallery. That's one thing that I definitely encourage you to do. If you make a change, if you copy some code, whether it be my code or some other example, be sure to change the relevant variable names so they make sense. This code we had before, it loops through as long as there's something in the gallery list. Nice thing again about Visual Studio Code for doing this is notice it showed me that there was an error. It's not going to show you every single error that you make, but it's going to show some basic ones like you don't have your quote marks lined up. So now when we do this, we can put in 12, get our 12 images, put in 5, clears out what's there and only gives us the 5 images. All right. Now, how is this different from what you have to do? All right. It's different from what you have to do 2 ways. Number 1, you also have to do a calculation. Well, let's see, maybe 3 ways, maybe 3 or 4 ways. Number 1, you also have to do a calculation. So you have to take the value of a penny and multiply it times the amount and come up with how many cents it is. So that's an extra thing that you have to do that I didn't do in this example. All right, but you need to do it in your assignment. So there's that extra thing of doing a calculation for the value of the coins. Second thing is it's not always going to be a penny. Well, what does that mean from the code? It means that this and this can't be hard-coded. They have to come from the value of a variable. Therefore, you're going to grab that variable somehow. All right, you could probably do it several different ways. But you're going to grab the value of that variable somehow. You need to know which coin was selected. All right, and based on what coin is selected, display the appropriate image. Third way that this is different is you're not using a value from a text box, you're using a value from a drop-down, if I remember right. Well, that's not a drastic difference, but it is a difference. I think it's always useful to look at examples that way. To look at something that you're doing that's new and be able to see how it resembles examples that you already have gone over and that you already understand. I mean, we sort of did that when we compared this example to the example that we have done before, right? We viewed that in both cases, we need to create an element. We need to add that element to some area on our page as a child. All right, is there any questions over this? Wait a second here to see if anyone has a question. Yes. For the lab, we wouldn't still need the text node to display the text that says this coin is X cents. You would need the text node for that. That is correct. I only addressed the issue with the images in my example. Right? So that other piece that calculates the value of the coins and displays that, yes, you would need to do that. You just would not need a text node associated with the images. Anything else? We have a few more minutes left. I can either entertain some questions or I can begin talking about what our topic for next week will be. Yeah, next week we'll do the same thing. I'll see if you have any questions. If you do, we'll cover them. If not, we'll go over to explore the next topic. Would we use the image ID to assign the coin to appropriate scenario? Would we use the image ID? No, if I'm understanding you correct. You would have something like this in here. You'd have a variable called image file. If I'm understanding your correction right. You would then have a series of if statements. If something is true, then image file equals penny.jpg. This is one way you could do it. And again, that would be which radio button is clicked on. If something else were true, then image file equals nickel. And so on down the line. And then you would replace this penny JPEG with the image file. If I'm understanding your question, that's kind of what you would do. You don't really need to use an ID with the image because once you create the image, you never refer back to it via JavaScript code, other than to remove it in this little snippet of code here. Other questions? We can certainly review this more in lab if you want, if you have more questions about it. We only have a couple minutes left, so if there are any more questions, I'll be glad to entertain them. Otherwise, we can call it a day and move to lab. Other questions? Okay, give me a few minutes to get something to drink and make it up to lab. I'll be in the lab roughly 10 o'clock. And if you have more questions, we can go over them then. All right. Take care, and we'll talk to you later.